Now, Mary of Nazareth is the focus of our biblical character today. She's the mother of Jesus, who could be considered to have suffered from overzealous champions or opposers down the years. She's had to endure becoming a symbol for a dogma, but you know, she's far more than that. And we do well to return to what we know of Mary. Mary is clearly a pious and gracious woman, somebody who loved God, who had a real position for God in her life. She's an altogether attractive person to whom we're drawn. I mean by that, there are characteristics about her life that you can't help but admire and feel you want to be a part of what it was that made her who she was. It's also clear she becomes a widow very early in life, hence this special relationship with Jesus in needing to find somebody to care for her at the end. The fact that when Jesus is around, we hear very little about Joseph later in his life. So Jesus probably, as the eldest son, would be somebody at home having to care for her. She was there at the beginning and throughout Jesus' ministry. And she was there at the cross in those last terrible hours. And there also in the earliest days of the church that we discover in the first chapter of the Acts of the Apostles. Of all the things we could say about her, I believe her words in what we know as the Magnificat are the greatest of all. Now, these words are said by Christians in churches the world over on a regular basis. Many of them say them every Sunday. Certainly many of them say them in their weekly prayers. But I'm going to read just a few verses from the Magnificat in Luke 1, 46 to 49. And Mary said, "My soul glorifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Saviour, for he has been mindful of the humble state of his servant. From now on all generations will call me blessed, for the Mighty One has done great things for me. Holy is his name." Now these words have such a strong sense of purpose. And what follows are huge statements about what the coming of Jesus will mean. This gentle Mary speaks about the judgment of God upon those who ignore the poor, a special place for the poor. Catch the thought that Mary has great joy in the God who had shown her favour. She felt a real sense of privilege somehow had been poured out upon her. I think that's a great place to be at for all of us. She has joy, joy that will be a continuing theme through Luke. Luke has this marvellous emphasis upon joy. And she recognises that God is her Saviour. Now, I think that for Jesus, it would be so important to know what his ministry was like, but to have his relationship with his mother and to recognize that his mother saw her as Saviour, I think tells you a great deal of his relationship with her, a great deal of her somehow, shall we say, living within the orbit of what it means to belong to God in Jesus Christ. It was a great Anglican leader and a former Archbishop of York, Alan Richardson. He was actually the dean before that at York, who said, "Mary's humble acceptance of the divine will is the starting point of the story of the redemption of the human race from sin." Now, what Richardson is saying there is not that it's Mary that saves us, but at the very beginning of the story of salvation, it is that willingness to be used by God, to be available to God, that makes it possible for the birth of Jesus. I mean, what of the cost? The cost in terms of what might be perceived as disgrace to a family. The cost in terms of needing to tell that story to her husband-to-be. And to know that she is to bear within her womb, within her life, the Son of God. So it's a great story, but it gives us an insight, I think, into something deep and profound. And the fact that Mary had to observe, you remember that verse, it tells us she treasured all these things in her heart. You've got that lovely thought that she was watching all the things that were happening, listening to the words he spoke, listening to the parables, seeing the crowd, seeing his healing, seeing him reaching out to the poor and the marginalized. And yet in all of that, acknowledging that this is, oh yes, it's my son, but it's somebody far more than that. And recognizing it all in all its pain when we come to the cross. I can't imagine anybody that observed those final days around the cross that would have felt the pain more deeply than Jesus. And then we have that wonderful moment on the cross where John, who is known as the beloved disciple, the one that Jesus had a special relationship with, the one who lay by him at the Last Supper and on him, there he gives to him a mother and to his mother a son. Now, you don't do that unless you really have a concern for your mother. And Jesus had a concern for this woman. So whatever's happened in the history of the church, of those who've overemphasized Mary to the exclusion of Jesus, and those who have refused to acknowledge the place of Mary, there needs to be that real balance. For she was the mother of the Saviour, who is the Son of God.